My name is Detective Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 31 years old. For 3 years, my family thought I was just a security guard at a downtown office building because I was working undercover for the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force. At my brother's wedding last month, my father humiliated me in front of 200 guests by dismissing my simple job compared to my siblings' successful careers. 24 hours later, those same guests watched me on every news channel arresting the mayor and half the city council in the biggest corruption bust in our city's history. Before I tell you how my father's public humiliation backfired spectacularly when my real identity was revealed on live television, I need to ask you something. Have you ever let someone think less of you to protect a secret that would shock them? The moment my cover was blown and my family discovered who I really was changed everything forever. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe because this story shows what happens when family embarrassment meets federal law enforcement in the most dramatic way possible. To understand how devastating my father's public dismissal was and how satisfying the revelation became, you need to know about the double life I'd been living for 3 years as an undercover federal agent infiltrating one of the most sophisticated corruption networks in our state's history. I'd graduated from the FBI Academy at Quantico 5 years earlier, specializing in white-collar crime and organized corruption cases. After 2 years working traditional federal cases, I was recruited for an elite undercover program targeting municipal corruption that had been operating in our mid-sized Georgia city for over a decade. The assignment was complex and dangerous. Pose as a low-level security guard to gain access to the downtown government complex where city officials, contractors, and organized crime figures were conducting business that had cost taxpayers millions of dollars while enriching a network of corrupt politicians and their criminal associates. My cover identity was Sarah Collins, a divorced single mother working as a night shift security guard for Pinnacle Security Services. I rented a modest apartment, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and lived a carefully constructed life of financial struggle that would explain my presence in the government building during hours when illegal meetings and document exchanges were most likely to occur. The investigation focused on Mayor Richard Valdez, who we suspected was at the center of a conspiracy involving fraudulent city contracts, money laundering through construction projects, and connections to organized crime families operating throughout the Southeast. But building a federal case required evidence of specific crimes, detailed documentation of financial transactions, and recorded conversations that would prove conspiracy and racketeering charges. My role was to be invisible while being everywhere important things happened. As a security guard, I had access to the entire government complex, including floors and offices that were restricted to most employees. I could monitor hallways, observe late-night meetings, and position surveillance equipment without arousing suspicion. The work was meticulous and often boring, involving long hours of surveillance, careful documentation of who met with whom and when, and the gradual building of trust with people who might provide information about illegal activities. I spent months learning the routines of every city employee, contractor, and frequent visitor to the complex. But the personal cost of deep undercover work was higher than I'd anticipated. Maintaining my cover identity required lying to everyone in my life, including my family, about fundamental aspects of who I was and what I did for work. I couldn't discuss my real job, my achievements, or my professional goals with the people closest to me. My family knew I worked in security at a downtown office building, which technically wasn't a lie, but they assumed I was a low-paid guard with a boring job rather than a federal agent conducting a multi-million-dollar investigation. I couldn't correct their assumptions without compromising the operation and potentially endangering both the investigation and the safety of everyone involved. The FBI had provided detailed backstory for my cover identity, including employment records, financial history, and personal details that would withstand casual scrutiny. Sarah Collins had a high school education, no college degree, and a work history of retail and service jobs before transitioning to security work. She was struggling financially, living paycheck to paycheck, and had no particular ambitions beyond keeping her job and paying her bills. This cover story required me to dress down, drive an old car, live in a modest apartment, and generally present myself as someone with limited education and professional prospects. When family members asked about my work, I had to deflect questions or give vague answers about checking IDs and monitoring security cameras. The contrast between my real identity and my cover identity was stark and sometimes painful. I had a master's degree in criminal justice, had graduated in the top 10% of my FBI Academy class, and was conducting sophisticated surveillance and investigation work that required advanced training and skills. But to my family, I was Sarah who couldn't get her life together and was working a dead-end security job. My siblings had all achieved conventional success that was easy to understand and discuss at family gatherings. My older brother Mark was a successful corporate attorney, my sister Jennifer was a pediatric nurse, and my younger brother David was a high school principal. Their careers were respected, well compensated, and socially prestigious. Meanwhile, I was the family disappointment who'd settled for a low-paying security job and seemed to have no ambition for advancement or improvement. Family conversations about career achievements, professional goals, and financial success were awkward because I couldn't participate honestly without compromising my cover. The investigation itself was progressing steadily, with our team gathering evidence of a conspiracy that involved not just the mayor, but multiple city council members, the city attorney, several major contractors, and connections to organized crime figures who were using city contracts to launder money from drug trafficking and other illegal enterprises. Mayor Valdez was particularly brazen in his corruption, apparently believing that his political connections and the complexity of the schemes would protect him from investigation. He held late-night meetings in his office with contractors and known criminal associates, discussed bribes and kickbacks openly in areas he thought were private, and had become increasingly careless about documenting his illegal activities. As the security guard on duty during many of these late-night meetings, I was able to observe and document activities that provided crucial evidence for our case. I witnessed cash exchanges, recorded conversations about fraudulent contracts, and photographed documents that proved the conspiracy extended far beyond what we'd initially suspected. The investigation had expanded to include federal racketeering charges, money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy charges that could result in decades of prison time for the major participants. We were building cases against 17 different individuals, including elected officials, city employees, contractors, and organized crime figures. But the personal toll of maintaining my cover identity was becoming increasingly difficult, especially during family events where my siblings' professional success was celebrated while my apparent lack of achievement was either ignored or treated with pity. The worst moments came when family members would make comments about my need to get serious about my career, suggestions that I should go back to school or find a real job, and well-meaning advice about how to improve my life situation. I couldn't explain that my current job was actually the culmination of years of education and training, that I was conducting important work that served the public interest, or that my apparent lack of success was a carefully constructed facade. My father was particularly vocal about his disappointment in my career choices, often making comments about how I'd wasted my potential and settled for mediocrity when I was capable of so much more. These conversations were painful because he was simultaneously right and completely wrong. I was capable of more than being a security guard, but I was already doing much more than he realized. 3 months before my brother David's wedding, our investigation had reached the point where we were preparing to execute search warrants, make arrests, and bring down the entire corruption network we'd been investigating for 3 years. The timing meant that my cover would be blown right around the time of major family celebrations, but there was no way to delay the operation without risking that evidence might be destroyed or conspirators might flee. I had no idea that my father's public humiliation at David's wedding would make the eventual revelation of my real identity even more dramatic and satisfying than it would have been otherwise. David's wedding was supposed to be a celebration of love and family unity, but it became the setting for the most humiliating public dismissal I'd ever experienced from my own father. The event was elaborate, 200 guests at the city's most prestigious country club, with extended family, family friends, business associates, and community leaders all gathered to celebrate my brother's marriage to Rebecca, a successful marketing executive from a prominent local family. I'd taken time off from my undercover assignment to attend the wedding, which required careful coordination with my FBI supervisors to ensure the investigation wouldn't be compromised by my temporary absence from the government complex. I wore a modest dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, one that fit my cover identity's budget constraints but was appropriate for such a formal family event. The problem started during the cocktail hour, when various guests asked about my work and family members deflected or gave vague answers about my security job downtown. I could see the polite confusion on people's faces as they tried to understand why someone from a family of successful professionals was working as a security guard. "Sarah works in security," my mother would say with the kind of forced smile that suggested this wasn't something she was particularly proud to discuss. "Oh, like corporate security consulting?" guests would ask, clearly trying to find a way to make my job sound more prestigious than it appeared. "More like building security," my sister Jennifer would respond, and I could see people trying to process why someone would introduce their family member's career in such apologetic terms. But the real humiliation came during my father's speech at the reception dinner. Dad had always been a successful businessman who valued achievement, status, and conventional measures of success. He'd built a regional manufacturing company from nothing and took pride in his children's professional accomplishments, which made my apparent lack of career progress particularly disappointing to him. "I want to talk about the success of our family," Dad began, addressing the room full of guests who included some of the most prominent people in our community. "Mark has built a thriving law practice, Jennifer saves children's lives as a pediatric nurse, and David is shaping young minds as an educator and administrator." I could see where this was going, and my stomach started clenching as he prepared to address my place in the family's narrative of success. "Sarah has chosen a different path," he continued, and the way he said different made it clear that this wasn't going to be a celebration of diverse career choices. "She works as a security guard downtown. It's honest work." The phrase honest work delivered with that tone and that pause made it clear that he was damning with faint praise. He was telling 200 people that his daughter was employed in a job that was respectable enough but nothing special, nothing to be proud of, nothing that reflected the family's values of ambition and achievement. "We all find our own level," he concluded, looking directly at me with what I can only describe as disappointment disguised as acceptance. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel every eye in the room turning toward me, trying to gauge my reaction to being publicly characterized as the family underachiever. Some guests looked embarrassed for me, others seemed confused about why my father would highlight my lack of success during a wedding speech, and a few appeared to be making mental notes about family dynamics they hadn't previously understood. My brother Mark looked mortified, Jennifer was staring at her plate, and David, the groom, appeared to be calculating whether he should intervene or pretend this awkward moment wasn't happening at his own wedding reception. "Dad, maybe we should focus on David and Rebecca tonight," I said quietly, trying to deflect attention and minimize the damage of his public dismissal. "Of course," he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But I believe in acknowledging everyone's contributions to our family, even if they're more modest than others." More modest. In front of 200 people, including my extended family, childhood friends, and prominent community members, my father had characterized my life's work as more modest than my siblings' achievements. The conversation at my table became uncomfortably focused on trying to make my security job sound more important or interesting than it actually appeared to be. Well-meaning relatives and family friends asked detailed questions about my work, clearly searching for aspects that might be more impressive than the basic security guard role my father had described. "Do you work with law enforcement?" asked my cousin Amy, who was trying to find a connection that would make my job sound more prestigious. "Sometimes," I replied vaguely, which was technically true but misleading in the way that my entire cover identity required. "Are you thinking about advancing to management or moving into corporate security?" asked Rebecca's father, who owned several businesses and was clearly trying to identify career progression opportunities that would make sense to him. "I'm focused on doing my current job well," I answered, which sounded like the response of someone with no ambition or career goals. The entire evening became an exercise in managing other people's pity and concern about my apparent lack of professional success. I watched family members try to change the subject when my career came up, saw guests exchange glances that clearly communicated their surprise that someone from such a successful family was working in such a basic job, and endured well-meaning advice about education and career development opportunities. But the most painful part was seeing how my apparent failure reflected on my parents, particularly my father, who had built his identity around his children's achievements. His public dismissal of my career wasn't just about his disappointment in me, it was about his embarrassment at having to acknowledge that one of his children hadn't lived up to the family's standards of success. "Sarah's always been different," I heard my mother explaining to a group of her friends. "She's never been as driven as the other kids. We keep hoping she'll find something she's passionate about, but for now, she seems content with her security job." Content with my security job. As if I were someone who lacked the ambition or ability to pursue anything more challenging or meaningful. The wedding reception continued with toasts celebrating David and Rebecca's achievements, stories about their bright future together, and conversations about career success and professional goals that I couldn't participate in honestly. I spent the evening feeling like an outsider in my own family, the disappointing daughter whose modest career was an embarrassment to be managed rather than an achievement to be celebrated. When the evening finally ended, I drove home to my modest apartment, still in my bridesmaid dress, feeling like the family failure that everyone now believed me to be. I couldn't tell anyone that their perceptions were wrong, that my real work was important and challenging, or that my apparent lack of success was actually the result of sophisticated training and professional dedication. But I also knew that in less than 24 hours, the FBI would be executing the largest corruption bust in our city's history, and my cover identity would be blown in the most public way possible. Everyone who had pitted me at that wedding reception was about to discover exactly who I really was and what I'd actually been doing for the past 3 years. The morning after David's wedding, I was back in my security guard uniform, positioned at my usual post in the government complex lobby, knowing that this would be the last day of my 3-year undercover assignment. Federal agents were already in position around the building, search warrants had been signed, and arrest teams were coordinating with local law enforcement to execute simultaneous raids across the city. At exactly 6:47 a.m., everything happened at once. FBI agents flooded the government complex through every entrance, federal marshals secured all exits, and arrest teams moved to specific offices where target subjects were already at work or were expected to arrive for early morning meetings. I had to maintain my cover identity right up until the moment the operation went public, which meant continuing to act like a confused security guard who was witnessing an unexpected law enforcement action rather than a federal agent who'd been instrumental in planning and executing the entire operation. "Ma'am, what's happening?" asked Janet, the city clerk who'd arrived early and was seeing federal agents throughout the building. "I don't know," I replied honestly, because even though I knew the general plan, I wasn't privy to every detail of the simultaneous arrests occurring across multiple locations. Some kind of federal investigation, it looks like. The arrests inside the government complex were swift and professional. Mayor Valdez was taken into custody in his office while reviewing documents that our investigation had proven were related to fraudulent contract schemes. City council members were arrested at their homes before they could arrive at work. The city attorney was arrested in the parking garage as he tried to leave the building with boxes of files. But my role in the operation remained secret until FBI Special Agent in Charge Patricia Reynolds approached my security desk with a folder containing arrest warrants and evidence documentation that would need to be secured as part of the federal seizure of city records. "Detective Mitchell," she said loudly enough for nearby city employees to hear, "excellent work on this investigation. Your 3 years of undercover surveillance made this entire operation possible." The transformation from Sarah Collins, security guard, to Detective Sarah Mitchell, FBI agent, happened in front of a lobby full of city employees, contractors, and early morning visitors who had watched me check their IDs and monitor security cameras for years without knowing my real identity. Janet's mouth fell open. "Sarah, you're FBI?" "Yes, ma'am. For the past 3 years, I've been working undercover to investigate corruption in city government." The shock on people's faces was immediate and complete. Employees who'd treated me as an invisible part of the building's furniture suddenly realized they'd been under federal surveillance by someone they'd considered a harmless security guard with no authority or importance. "But you're just... You work security," stammered Bill Henderson, a city contractor who'd been arrested 30 minutes earlier for his role in the fraud conspiracy. "I work for the Federal Bureau of Investigation," I replied, and the weight of that statement in front of people who'd dismissed me for years was incredibly satisfying. But the real revelation was still to come. Within hours, news crews were broadcasting live from the government complex, and my role in the investigation became the lead story on every local television station. Breaking news. The largest corruption investigation in our city's history has resulted in the arrests of Mayor Richard Valdez, 4 city council members, and dozens of contractors and associates in what federal authorities are calling a multi-million-dollar fraud and money laundering conspiracy, announced Channel 7's lead anchor. The investigation was conducted over 3 years by an undercover FBI agent who worked as a security guard in the city government complex, gathering evidence and documenting illegal activities while maintaining a cover identity that allowed her unprecedented access to the conspiracy's operations. Then came the moment that would change my family relationships forever. My photo appeared on screen as they identified me as the undercover agent who'd broken the case. Detective Sarah Mitchell, a federal agent with specialized training in organized crime investigation, posed as security guard Sarah Collins for 3 years while building the case that brought down this corruption network. Her work resulted in federal charges against 17 individuals and the recovery of millions of dollars in stolen public funds. My phone started ringing immediately. The first call was from Jennifer, my sister, whose voice was shaking when she answered. "Sarah, we're watching the news." "Is that really you? Are you really FBI?" "Yes, Jen. I've been working undercover for 3 years. I couldn't tell anyone, including family, because it would have compromised the investigation. But Dad said, at the wedding, he said you were just a security guard." "I was working as a security guard. That was my cover identity. But I'm actually a federal agent, and this was the biggest case of my career." The next call was from Mark, my attorney brother, who understood the legal implications of what I'd accomplished better than the rest of the family. "Sarah, I'm watching the press conference about the federal arrests. Did you really build this entire case yourself?" "I was part of a team, but yes, the undercover work was my primary responsibility. We've been building this case for 3 years. This is incredible. Do you realize what you've accomplished? This is going to be national news." He was right. By that afternoon, the story had been picked up by national news networks, with CNN and other major outlets reporting on the sophisticated corruption network and the undercover agent who'd exposed it. In a story that reads like a crime novel, FBI Detective Sarah Mitchell spent 3 years working as a night shift security guard while secretly documenting one of the most extensive municipal corruption schemes ever uncovered in the Southeast, reported the CNN anchor. But the most important call came from my father, and his voice was completely different from the dismissive tone he'd used at David's wedding reception. "Sarah, I don't know what to say. We're watching the news, and I can't believe what we're seeing. You're on television, they're calling you a hero, and Dad, I know this is a shock. I couldn't tell anyone about my real job because it would have compromised the investigation and potentially put people in danger. Sweetheart, I owe you an apology. What I said at the wedding. I had no idea. I'm so proud of you, and I'm ashamed of how I talked about your work in front of all those people. You didn't know, Dad. You couldn't have known. But I should have trusted that you had good reasons for the choices you were making. I should have supported you instead of being embarrassed by what I thought was your lack of ambition." The contrast between Saturday night's wedding humiliation and Sunday's national news coverage was stark and satisfying in ways I hadn't anticipated. People who'd pitted me for working a simple security job were now seeing me praised as a federal law enforcement hero who'd conducted one of the most successful undercover operations in the region's history. The irony wasn't lost on me that my father's public dismissal of my career had occurred exactly 24 hours before the biggest professional triumph of my life was broadcast on every news channel in the country. I need to pause here because what happened next was beyond anything I could have imagined. You might think that having your true identity revealed on national television would be the climax of this story, but you'd be wrong. The media attention that followed turned my family's private embarrassment into a public spectacle that revealed not just my secret career, but the ugly truth about how families treat members they perceive as failures. If you've ever been underestimated by people who should have supported you, what happened at the follow-up family gathering will either inspire you or break your heart. Make sure you stay subscribed because this story is about to show you exactly what happens when people who dismissed you discover they were completely wrong about who you are. The media attention following the arrests was unlike anything I'd experienced or expected. Within 48 hours, my story had been featured on national news programs, true crime podcasts, and law enforcement publications as an example of successful long-term undercover work and innovative federal investigation techniques. FBI agent poses as security guard for 3 years to bust corruption ring became the headline that defined how the story was covered across multiple platforms. News crews requested interviews, documentary producers called about potential projects, and law enforcement training programs asked me to speak about undercover methodology and maintaining cover identities under pressure. But the personal revelation that fascinated media outlets most was the family angle, the fact that my own relatives had been unaware of my real career and had actually been embarrassed by what they thought was my lack of professional success. A local reporter had somehow obtained information about my father's wedding speech and the family dynamics that had played out in public just hours before my identity was revealed. Sources tell us that Detective Mitchell's family was unaware of her real career and had actually expressed concern about her apparent lack of professional ambition, with her father publicly referring to her work as honest but modest at a family wedding just 1 day before her role in this major federal investigation was revealed, reported Channel 7's Evening News. This detail transformed the story from a straightforward law enforcement success into a human interest narrative about family expectations, hidden achievements, and the price of undercover work on personal relationships. My phone was ringing constantly with interview requests, but also with calls from family members, friends, and acquaintances who were processing the revelation that someone they'd known for years was actually a federal agent working on a major criminal investigation. David called from his honeymoon, having seen the news coverage while he and Rebecca were supposed to be relaxing on a beach in the Caribbean. Sarah, Rebecca, and I are watching CNN, and they're showing your photo and talking about the corruption investigation. Her parents keep texting us asking if this is the same Sarah who works as a security guard. I don't even know how to explain this. David, I'm sorry this is happening during your honeymoon. I couldn't control the timing of when the case would go public. Don't apologize. I'm proud of you. But I keep thinking about what Dad said at the wedding, and I feel sick about how we've all been treating you. The wedding guests, meanwhile, were having their own revelations as they processed what they'd witnessed. The people who'd heard my father dismiss my career were now seeing me described as a federal law enforcement hero on national television. My cousin Amy posted on Facebook. Still processing that my cousin Sarah, who my uncle said was just a security guard at David's wedding on Saturday, was actually an undercover FBI agent bringing down the mayor and half the city council. Family dynamics are complicated, y'all. But the most significant response came from the wedding guests who held prominent positions in the community and now realized they'd witnessed a federal agent being humiliated by her own father for achieving exactly the kind of public service that they claimed to value. Rebecca's father, who owned several local businesses, called my parents directly to express his shock and admiration. "Robert, I need to tell you that what Sarah has accomplished is extraordinary," he told my father. "She's been protecting our entire community from corruption while we all thought she was just working security. You should be incredibly proud of her." The country club where the wedding had been held started receiving calls from members who'd attended the reception and were now realizing they'd witnessed something unprecedented, a family publicly dismissing someone who was actually conducting heroic undercover work to protect their community. My mother called me in tears after the third day of continuous news coverage. "Sarah, people keep calling us to congratulate us on your achievements, and I don't know what to say. I'm so proud of you, but I'm also ashamed of how we've been talking about your career for 3 years. Mom, you didn't know. The whole point of undercover work is that no one knows. But we should have trusted you. We should have believed that you had good reasons for your choices instead of assuming you were just not ambitious enough to get a better job." The most difficult conversation was with my father, who requested a private meeting to discuss what had happened at the wedding and what it meant for our relationship going forward. We met at a quiet restaurant where he could speak without other family members present, and I could see that the media coverage and community response had fundamentally changed how he understood both my career and his own behavior. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what I said at David's wedding, and I'm horrified," he began. "Not just because I was wrong about your job, but because of what it revealed about how I view success and how I treat my own children. Dad, you couldn't have known." "Yes, I could have. Maybe not about the specific details of your undercover work, but I could have known that you're intelligent, capable, and dedicated. I could have trusted that you had good reasons for your choices instead of assuming you were failing." He pulled out his phone and showed me screenshots of news articles about the investigation, with headlines praising my work and describing the importance of the corruption bust. "Sarah, the mayor of our city is going to prison because of work you did. Millions of dollars in stolen public funds are being recovered because of your investigation. You've probably prevented years of additional corruption and criminal activity. And 3 days ago, I told 200 people that you'd found your level as a security guard." The pain in his voice was genuine, and I could see that this wasn't just about embarrassment or regret, it was about a fundamental recognition that his values and judgment had been completely wrong. What hurts most is thinking about all the times over the past 3 years when you might have wanted to share your real achievements with your family, but you couldn't because of the requirements of your job, he continued. "You've been protecting all of us, and our community, while we were treating you like the family disappointment." The conversation was emotional and necessary, but it also revealed something important about family dynamics and expectations. My father's assumption that I was unsuccessful hadn't just been about my apparent job, it had been about his need to categorize his children's achievements in ways that made sense to his understanding of success and status. "I think I need to examine why I was so quick to assume you were failing instead of succeeding in ways I didn't understand," he said. "And I think our family needs to have some difficult conversations about how we define success and how we support each other." But the revelation that would really test our family relationships was still to come. The media attention had attracted the interest of people who remembered me from before my FBI career, and some of those people had stories to tell about my actual qualifications and achievements that my family had apparently forgotten or never fully understood. My college professors, my FBI Academy instructors, and my previous supervisors were being interviewed about my background and capabilities, and their comments were revealing just how accomplished I'd actually been long before the undercover assignment. The family was about to discover that their assumptions about my lack of ambition and achievement were even more wrong than they'd realized. As the media coverage continued, reporters began investigating my background and qualifications, interviewing people from my educational and professional history who provided details about my achievements that my family had either forgotten or never fully understood. What emerged was a picture of someone who'd been succeeding at the highest levels long before the undercover assignment, making my family's assumptions about my lack of ambition even more devastating. Dr. Patricia Williams, my criminal justice professor from college, was interviewed by the local news about my academic background and potential. "Sarah Mitchell was one of the most exceptional students I taught in 30 years of university education," Dr. Williams told Channel 7. "She graduated summa cum laude with a 3.94 GPA, wrote an honors thesis on organized crime investigation techniques that was later published in an academic journal, and was recruited by multiple federal agencies before she'd even finished her degree." The reporter followed up, "So she was always destined for federal law enforcement?" "Sarah had job offers from the FBI, DEA, and ATF before graduation. She was the kind of student who had unlimited potential in federal law enforcement. Anyone who knew her academic record would have expected her to achieve exactly what she's achieved. My family watched this interview with growing shock, realizing that they'd somehow managed to forget or minimize achievements that should have been obvious indicators of my potential and ambition. My FBI Academy class supervisor, Special Agent Martinez, provided even more context about my training and early career performance. Detective Mitchell graduated in the top 5% of her FBI Academy class, he told a reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She excelled in surveillance techniques, undercover methodology, and white-collar crime investigation. She was specifically recruited for long-term undercover work because of her intelligence, her ability to maintain cover identities under pressure, and her exceptional investigative skills. Was she considered a rising star in the Bureau? Sarah Mitchell was considered one of the most promising young agents in her cohort. Her assignment to this corruption investigation was recognition of her capabilities and potential. Only the most trusted and skilled agents get assigned to 3-year undercover operations. But the most revealing interview came from my previous supervisor, who'd worked with me on traditional federal cases before I was recruited for the undercover program. Detective Mitchell solved cases that other agents couldn't crack, he told CNN. She had an intuitive understanding of criminal behavior and an ability to build cases that would hold up in federal court. When she was selected for the undercover corruption investigation, all of us knew she was the right person for the job, but we also knew it would require her to hide her real achievements from everyone in her life, including her family. These interviews were being broadcast while my parents, siblings, and extended family were still processing the basic revelation that I was FBI rather than a security guard. Learning that I'd been an academic star, a top FBI Academy graduate, and a rising star in federal law enforcement made them realize that their assumptions about my lack of achievement were completely backwards. Jennifer called me after watching Dr. Williams' interview, and her voice was filled with a mixture of pride and confusion. "Sarah, they're saying you graduated summa cum laude and were recruited by federal agencies before you even finished college. I don't remember us celebrating those achievements. Did we not know about them? Jen, you all knew I graduated with honors and was starting a job with the FBI. But I think the family was so focused on Mark's law school graduation and your nursing program that my achievements got lost in the shuffle. But summa cum laude means you were one of the top students in your entire class. That's a huge achievement. Why didn't we make a bigger deal about that?" The uncomfortable truth was that my family had been so focused on achievements they understood and could easily categorize that they'd minimized or overlooked accomplishments that didn't fit their familiar patterns of success. Mark's law degree from a prestigious university was something everyone could understand and celebrate. Jennifer's nursing career was clearly important and socially valuable. David's education degree and principalship were recognizable forms of professional achievement. But my criminal justice degree, my FBI Academy graduation, and my federal law enforcement career had somehow been processed as less impressive or important, even though they actually represented higher levels of achievement and competition than my siblings' careers. My mother called after watching the interview with Special Agent Martinez, and she sounded devastated. "Sarah, they're saying you were in the top 5% of your FBI Academy class. That means you beat out hundreds of other agents. Why didn't we understand how impressive that was?" "Mom, I tried to explain about the academy and the competitive selection process, but I think the family was more focused on whether federal law enforcement was a stable career than on the level of achievement it represented. We treated your FBI job like it was just another entry-level government position instead of recognizing that you'd earned one of the most competitive positions in federal law enforcement." But the most painful revelation came when a reporter tracked down my undergraduate advisor, who'd written one of my recommendation letters for the FBI and had followed my career with interest. Sarah Mitchell was the kind of student who comes along once in a professor's career, Professor James Thompson told the reporter. She had the intellectual ability to pursue any career she wanted, law school, graduate studies, corporate leadership, but she chose federal law enforcement because she wanted to serve her community and protect people from criminal exploitation. Did you expect her to achieve this level of success? I expected her to achieve whatever she set her mind to accomplish. What impressed me most was that she chose a career focused on service rather than personal advancement. She could have made more money in corporate law or consulting, but she chose to be an FBI agent because she believed in the mission. This interview was broadcast during prime time on the same day that several major national news outlets published in-depth profiles about the corruption investigation and my role in it. The contrast between my actual achievements and my family's perceptions became a central theme in the coverage. The undercover agent whose own family didn't know her worth became the headline of a Washington Post article that examined how undercover work requires agents to hide not just their current activities, but often their entire professional identity from the people closest to them. The article quoted family dynamics experts about the psychological toll of being systematically underestimated by your own relatives, even when the underestimation is necessary for professional reasons. Detective Mitchell's experience illustrates how family members can become so invested in their assumptions about someone's capabilities that they fail to recognize or remember actual achievements, explained Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a family counselor who specialized in law enforcement families. The fact that her family forgot or minimized her academic excellence and FBI Academy success suggests that they'd already decided she was the less successful child and were interpreting all information through that lens. But the media coverage also revealed something else that my family hadn't understood: the personal sacrifice that undercover work requires and the professional recognition I'd received for making those sacrifices effectively. The FBI's public statement about the investigation included details about my performance that my family had never known. Detective Mitchell's 3-year undercover assignment required exceptional dedication and skill, the statement read. She maintained her cover identity while gathering evidence in dangerous situations, often working alone in environments where exposure could have threatened both the investigation and her personal safety. Her work exemplifies the highest standards of federal law enforcement. My Uncle Tom, who'd been present at David's wedding and had witnessed my father's dismissive speech, called after reading this FBI statement. "Sarah, I need to apologize for something. When your dad was talking about your modest career at the wedding, I remember thinking that maybe you just weren't as ambitious as your siblings. Reading about what you've actually been doing for 3 years, I realize I was completely wrong about who you are and what you're capable of. Uncle Tom, you couldn't have known. But that's the point. I should have known. Your family should have known. We should have recognized your achievements and trusted your judgment instead of assuming you were settling for mediocrity." The revelation of my real background also prompted responses from people outside the family who'd made assumptions about my capabilities based on my cover identity as a security guard. Bill Henderson, the city contractor who'd been arrested as part of the corruption investigation, gave an interview from jail where he expressed shock about my real identity. "She checked my ID for 3 years," he told a reporter. "I thought she was just some lady working security to pay the bills. I had meetings about illegal contracts 20 feet from her desk, and I never imagined she was federal law enforcement. I feel stupid, but also impressed, I guess. She's obviously way smarter than any of us realized." Janet, the city clerk who'd worked in the same building, had a different perspective that was both complimentary and revealing about how people perceive others based on their apparent job status. "Sarah was always professional and friendly, but I thought she was just working security because that's what she could get," Janet told a local news crew. "Now I realize she was probably analyzing everything we did and said, building a case against corruption while we all thought she was just checking visitors in and out. It makes me respect her work even more, but it also makes me think about how we judge people based on their jobs." The most significant response, however, came from the wedding guests who'd witnessed my father's speech and were now processing what they'd actually seen. Rebecca's mother called my parents directly to express her shock and admiration, but also to address the family dynamics that had been revealed. "Robert, Helen, I've been thinking about David's wedding and what happened during your speech," she told my parents. "At the time, I felt uncomfortable because it seemed like you were dismissing Sarah's career in front of everyone. Now that we know what she was actually doing, I'm amazed by her dedication and your family's strength in supporting an undercover operation without knowing you were doing it." "We didn't know we were supporting anything," my father replied honestly. "We thought she was just working a basic security job, and we were disappointed in what we saw as her lack of ambition." But that's what makes it even more impressive. Sarah was serving her community and protecting all of us while her own family thought she was underachieving. That takes incredible strength and commitment. This conversation, and others like it, forced my parents to confront not just their lack of knowledge about my real career, but their fundamental assumptions about success, achievement, and family support. The community response was overwhelmingly positive, with local business leaders, elected officials, and community organizations expressing gratitude for my work and admiration for the sacrifices I'd made to protect the public from corruption. The mayor-elect, who'd been elected to replace the now imprisoned Richard Valdez, issued a public statement thanking me for my service and acknowledging the personal cost of undercover work. Detective Mitchell spent 3 years protecting our community while appearing to be just another working person trying to make ends meet, the statement read. Her willingness to be misunderstood, even by her own family, in order to serve the public good represents the highest ideals of law enforcement and public service. But for me, the most meaningful responses came from my siblings, who were grappling with the realization that they'd fundamentally misunderstood my capabilities and achievements for years. Mark, my lawyer brother, sent me a long email after watching several days of news coverage about my background and the investigation. "Sarah, I've been a lawyer for 8 years, and I thought I understood what constitutes impressive professional achievement. What you've accomplished, the academic excellence, the FBI Academy success, and this investigation, represents a level of achievement that I'm not sure any of us have matched. I'm ashamed that we didn't recognize or celebrate your success, and I'm proud to be your brother." But the real test of how this revelation would change my family relationships was still to come. The media attention would eventually fade, but the knowledge of what had been revealed about family dynamics, assumptions, and support would be permanent. We were about to discover whether learning the truth about my achievements would fundamentally change how my family understood success, or whether the patterns of assumption and dismissal would simply shift to new targets. 2 weeks after the arrests and media revelations, my family requested a meeting to discuss what had been revealed about our relationships and how we wanted to move forward. The gathering was held at my parents' house, with all siblings present, and the atmosphere was unlike any family meeting we'd ever had. Everyone was processing not just the shock of my real career, but the uncomfortable realization that our family dynamics had been fundamentally flawed in ways that were now publicly documented and nationally discussed. "I think we need to start by acknowledging what happened and what it revealed about how we function as a family," my father began, his voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before. "What I said at David's wedding wasn't just wrong about Sarah's career, it revealed problematic assumptions about success, achievement, and how we support each other." Jennifer was the first to address the deeper issues that the revelation had exposed. "Sarah, I've been thinking about conversations we've had over the past 3 years, and I'm horrified by some of the things I said. I remember suggesting that you should get serious about your career and think about going back to school. I was giving you advice about achieving success while you were actually conducting one of the most successful investigations in our city's history." "Jen, you couldn't have known, but that's not the point," she interrupted. "The point is that I made assumptions about your capabilities and ambitions without really knowing what you were doing or why. I treated you like someone who needed my guidance instead of recognizing that you might have good reasons for your choices." Mark had been particularly affected by the revelation because, as a lawyer, he understood better than the rest of the family what my investigation had actually accomplished in legal and professional terms. "Sarah, I've been reviewing the charges and evidence in your case, and what you've achieved is extraordinary by any professional standard," he said. The complexity of the investigation, the legal sophistication required to build federal racketeering cases, and the skill needed to maintain an undercover identity for 3 years, it's honestly more impressive than anything I've done in my legal career. "Mark, you don't need to compare." "Yes, I do need to compare, because that's what we've been doing wrong. We've been ranking each other's achievements without understanding what those achievements actually represent. I thought my law practice was more impressive than your security job, but your security job was actually more challenging and important than my corporate law work. David, whose wedding had been the setting for the original humiliation, was struggling with guilt about the timing and public nature of what had happened. Sarah, I keep thinking about my wedding and feeling sick about what Dad said in front of all those people. Our wedding reception became the setting for you being publicly dismissed for achievements that were actually extraordinary. David, the timing wasn't your fault. The investigation had its own timeline that couldn't be adjusted for personal events. But it means that some of the most important people in our lives witnessed you being treated as the family failure just hours before discovering you were actually the family success story. That's humiliating for all of us, but especially for you. My mother had been quietly crying throughout this conversation, and when she finally spoke, her words addressed the maternal guilt she'd been carrying. Sarah, I keep thinking about all the times I worried about your future, all the conversations Helen and I had about whether you'd ever find your direction in life. I was actually worried about you while you were protecting all of us and serving your community in ways I never imagined. Mom, parents worry about their children. That's normal. But I wasn't just worrying, I was judging. I was disappointed in what I thought was your lack of ambition while you were actually demonstrating more ambition and capability than any of us realized. The conversation revealed that the family had developed a hierarchy of achievement that was based more on visibility and conventional success markers than on actual accomplishment or social value. My siblings' careers were easily understood and celebrated, while my federal law enforcement work had been categorized as less impressive because it didn't fit familiar patterns. But the discussion also revealed something else, how the family's assumptions had affected my own sense of belonging and value within our relationships. Sarah, my father said, I want to understand something. During these 3 years, when we were treating your career as disappointing or unsuccessful, how did that affect you personally? I'd been dreading this question because answering it honestly would reveal just how painful the family dynamic had been. Dad, it was really hard sometimes. There were moments when I wanted to share my real achievements with you, times when I wanted you to know that I was actually succeeding at something important. But I couldn't, and I had to watch the family celebrate other people's successes while treating mine as something to be concerned about or pitted. Can you give us an example? Jennifer asked gently. Remember when Mark made partner at his law firm, and we had that big celebration dinner? The same week, I'd been commended by the FBI for gathering crucial evidence in the corruption case, but I had to sit at that dinner listening to conversations about impressive career achievements while keeping quiet about my own work. The silence that followed was heavy with recognition of how isolating and painful that experience must have been. Sarah, there were probably dozens of moments like that over 3 years, my mother said. Times when you had professional successes you couldn't share, achievements you couldn't celebrate with your family, recognition you couldn't discuss. And meanwhile, we were making you feel like the family disappointment, Mark added. We were celebrating our own careers while dismissing yours, not knowing that yours was actually more challenging and important than any of ours. But the most difficult part of the conversation came when we addressed how the public nature of the revelation had changed our family's standing in the community and the relationships we had with friends, colleagues, and social connections. The people who were at David's wedding have all seen the news coverage, my father said. They heard me dismiss your career, and then they saw you on television being praised as a federal law enforcement hero. That reflects badly on all of us, but especially on me as your father. Dad, the community response has been positive. People understand that you couldn't have known about my undercover work. But they also understand that I was quick to assume my daughter was unsuccessful instead of trusting that she had good reasons for her choices. That reveals something about my character and my relationship with my children that isn't flattering. The conversation continued for several hours, with family members acknowledging specific incidents, apologizing for particular comments or assumptions, and discussing how we wanted to change our family dynamics going forward. But the most important outcome was the recognition that our family had developed patterns of judgment and assumption that could easily be applied to future situations if we didn't consciously work to change them. This experience has taught me that we need to be more curious about each other's lives and more trusting of each other's judgment, my mother said. Instead of assuming we understand someone's situation, we need to ask questions and offer support even when we don't fully understand what's happening. And we need to be more careful about how we define and celebrate success, my father added. Sarah's career has always been successful, we just didn't recognize it because it didn't fit our familiar patterns. As the family meeting concluded, everyone seemed to understand that the revelation of my real career was just the beginning of a longer process of examining and changing our family relationships. The public humiliation at David's wedding had been painful, but it had also exposed family dynamics that needed to be addressed whether or not they'd been revealed in front of 200 guests. The real test would be whether we could sustain these insights and commitments when the dramatic circumstances faded and we returned to the ordinary interactions that would define our relationships going forward. 6 months after the corruption investigation became public, my life has settled into a new normal that's dramatically different from the undercover existence I'd maintained for 3 years. I've been reassigned to the FBI's white-collar crime unit, working cases that allow me to use my real identity and discuss my work openly with family and friends. The relief of not having to maintain a cover story has been more significant than I'd anticipated. The corruption trials are ongoing, with Mayor Valdez and most of his co-conspirators facing lengthy federal prison sentences. The investigation has been recognized as a model for long-term undercover operations, and I've been invited to speak at law enforcement conferences about maintaining cover identities and building federal cases through extended surveillance. But the most important changes have been in my family relationships and how we understand success, achievement, and support. The revelation of my real career forced everyone to examine assumptions and patterns that had been affecting our relationships for years without being consciously acknowledged. My father has become my strongest advocate and supporter, often bringing up my achievements in conversations with friends and business associates. It's almost as if he's trying to compensate for 3 years of dismissing my career by now promoting it at every opportunity. Sometimes I think Dad goes overboard talking about my FBI work, I told my mother during one of our weekly lunches. Yesterday he introduced me to his golf partners as my daughter, the federal agent who brought down the mayor. He's proud of you, but he's also working through his own guilt about not recognizing your achievements earlier, Mom replied. Give him time to find the right balance. The wedding guests and community members have been overwhelmingly positive in their responses, often expressing admiration for the personal sacrifices required for undercover work and appreciation for the public service my investigation represented. I keep thinking about that night at David's wedding, Rebecca's mother told me at a recent social event. Your father's speech was uncomfortable at the time, but knowing what we know now, it seems almost surreal. You were sitting there listening to him talk about your modest career while you were actually conducting the most important investigation in our city's history. The story has taken on a life of its own in our community, becoming a parable about assumptions, hidden achievements, and the importance of recognizing value in forms that might not be immediately obvious. Several local organizations have asked me to speak about my experience, not just from a law enforcement perspective, but as an example of perseverance and dedication in the face of misunderstanding. My siblings have each made conscious efforts to change how they approach family relationships and career discussions. Jennifer has become much more curious about people's work and life choices, asking questions about motivations and experiences rather than making assumptions about success or achievement. Mark has used his legal background to become more involved in supporting law enforcement families, particularly those dealing with the unique challenges of undercover work and classified assignments that can't be discussed with relatives. David has incorporated lessons about assumptions and judgment into his work as a high school principal, using my story as an example for students about the importance of not underestimating people based on superficial impressions. But perhaps the most significant change has been in how our family discusses and celebrates different types of achievement. We've become more conscious about recognizing value in various forms and more careful about making assumptions based on limited information. The experience has also given me perspective on the broader challenges faced by people whose work or life circumstances require them to be misunderstood by the people closest to them. Law enforcement families, military families, and people in other sensitive careers often face similar challenges in maintaining relationships while being unable to share important aspects of their lives. I've been contacted by other undercover agents and their families who've struggled with similar issues, and I've realized that my experience isn't unique. Many people sacrifice recognition and understanding from their loved ones in order to serve larger purposes, and those sacrifices often go unrecognized even after the work is completed. The media attention has faded, but the personal lessons remain relevant every day. I've learned the importance of trusting people's judgment even when I don't understand their choices, of asking questions rather than making assumptions, and of recognizing that success and achievement can take forms that aren't immediately visible or conventionally recognized. Here's what I want everyone watching this to understand: people's lives are often more complex and their achievements more significant than they appear on the surface. The family member you think is underachieving might be succeeding in ways you don't understand. The colleague whose career seems ordinary might be making extraordinary contributions that aren't visible or discussable. Real family support means trusting people's judgment and offering encouragement even when you don't fully understand what they're doing or why. It means celebrating achievements when they become known rather than focusing on regret about previous misunderstandings. The humiliation I experienced at David's wedding was painful, but it also created an opportunity for my family to examine and improve our relationships in ways that will benefit everyone going forward. So here's my question for all of you: have you ever been underestimated by people who should have supported you? How do you handle family members who make assumptions about your capabilities or achievements? What would you do if you discovered that someone you dismissed was actually extraordinarily successful? I want to hear your stories about hidden achievements, family assumptions, and the complex reality of maintaining relationships when important parts of your life can't be shared. Hit that like button if this story made you think about how you judge other people's success, and subscribe for more real stories about family dynamics, career challenges, and the unexpected ways that truth can be revealed. Thank you for following this story about sacrifice, misunderstanding, and ultimate vindication. The corruption investigation protected my community, but the family revelation taught me lessons about love, support, and recognition that are just as valuable as any professional achievement. Remember, the people in your life might be accomplishing more than you realize, serving purposes you don't understand, and making sacrifices you can't see. Trust their judgment, celebrate their achievements when they become known, and offer support even when you don't fully understand what they need it for. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next video.